The family burden finally showed up, my Uncle Richard Patterson said into the microphone, smiling as hundreds of graduates and their families turned to stare at me. Why would he humiliate me at a graduation I hadn't even come to celebrate? Why did the chair of the scholarship committee suddenly stand before anyone could laugh? And why was she carrying a sealed archive folder with my name that hadn't been opened in 15 years? Richard thought he was destroying my reputation with a single sentence. He had no idea that the file in Dr. Eleanor Price's hands contained proof that the biggest lie my family ever told wasn't about my future, it was about who stole it. If you're listening from somewhere in the world today, I'd genuinely love to know where you're watching from and what your local time is when this story finds you. Stories like this remind me that betrayal can happen anywhere, but so can truth. And if you enjoy emotional family stories where patience, evidence, and quiet strength matter more than revenge, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and stay with me until the end. 15 years before my uncle called me a burden in front of an entire graduation ceremony, I was the kind of teenager teachers like to describe as quietly exceptional. I never liked that phrase. It sounded like the polite version of invisible. At Roosevelt High School on the south side of Chicago, students who stood out usually did it with championship trophies, debate titles, or athletic scholarships. I stood out because I was dependable. I tutored freshmen in algebra before classes started. I volunteered twice a week at the neighborhood literacy center. I organized canned food drives every Thanksgiving. By senior year, I had a 4.0 GPA leadership awards and recommendation letters that I kept carefully organized in a blue accordion folder. Every piece of paper inside represented another hour spent believing education could change my life. I wanted to study education policy. Most 17-year-olds couldn't explain what that meant. I could. Growing up, I watched talented students disappear from classrooms because they couldn't afford transportation, childcare, or college application fees. I wanted to build systems that made opportunity easier to reach instead of harder. It wasn't a glamorous dream, but it was mine. The problem wasn't my grades. It was money. My father had passed away when I was 11, leaving my mother, Carol Patterson, to support us alone. She worked as a billing clerk at a medical clinic and never complained even when she came home exhausted after 10-hour shifts. She stretched every paycheck farther than seemed possible. New clothes became thrift store finds. Vacations became neighborhood picnics. Restaurant dinners became birthday traditions instead of monthly habits. She gave me everything she could. Unfortunately, everything still wasn't enough to pay university tuition. That was why scholarships mattered so much. By October of my senior year, I had submitted applications to more than 20 scholarship programs. Some offered $2,000, others covered tuition. A few were so competitive that guidance counselors joked students had better odds winning television game shows. I applied anyway. You've built one of the strongest applications I've seen in years. My guidance counselor, Monica Reed, told me one afternoon. She sat across from me with my transcript spread across her desk. I don't say that often. I smiled nervously. I keep waiting for someone to find a mistake. She laughed. The only mistake would be not applying everywhere. Then she pulled out one particular brochure, the Harrison Leadership Scholarship. Full tuition, housing, books, a living stipend, mentorship throughout college. It wasn't just financial aid. It was the kind of opportunity that changed entire families. They usually choose one student from Illinois every year, Monica said. And I actually have a chance. She looked directly at me. I wouldn't waste your time if you didn't. I remember walking home with that brochure folded inside my backpack. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine a future that didn't begin with student loans. That evening, my mother was cooking spaghetti when my Uncle Richard stopped by unexpectedly. Richard Patterson had a way of entering every room as if he'd already been invited. He owned a successful construction company, donated money to local charities, and served on several nonprofit boards. People respected him. Teachers recognized his name. Church members praised his generosity. Neighbors called him the man everyone could count on. Inside our family, his opinion carried even more weight. He hugged my mother, complimented dinner, then noticed the scholarship brochure lying on the kitchen counter. "Harrison Leadership Scholarship," he asked. I nodded. "My counselor thinks I should apply." Richard studied the brochure for several seconds before smiling. "That's ambitious." "I've already started the application." "I'm sure you have." His voice remained pleasant. "So has Ethan." Ethan was his son. We were only a year apart. He was friendly enough, but school had never interested him the way it interested me. He was outgoing, charismatic captain of the baseball team, and everyone seemed convinced leadership came naturally to him. Richard continued stirring his coffee. "Truthfully, Isabel, these scholarships often look beyond grades." "I know. They want leadership. I have leadership experience. They also like students who project confidence." I wasn't sure how to answer that. Before I could, he smiled again. "I'm only saying expectations should stay realistic." My mother changed the subject. I tried to, but the conversation stayed with me all evening. Over the following weeks, Richard became strangely interested in my college applications. Almost every Sunday, dinner included questions. How many essays left? Which schools replied? Did they request financial documents? Who handles scholarship correspondence? At first, I appreciated his interest. He even offered practical advice. "You have too much on your plate," he said one afternoon. "Between work, volunteering, and school, you're going to miss deadlines." "I've been keeping up." "I know you have." He leaned back in his chair, "but paperwork can get overwhelming." He explained that because of his experience serving on nonprofit boards, he understood scholarship requirements better than most families. "If letters come in while you're at school or work, I can help organize everything." "It'll save everyone stress." My mother looked relieved. "I'd appreciate that." "So would I," Richard replied. He turned toward me. "What do you think?" I hesitated. Something about the offer made me uncomfortable, not because it sounded unreasonable, because it sounded unnecessary. "I've already made a filing system." He chuckled. "Of course you have." Then he reached across the table and patted my shoulder. "You're responsible." "But responsible people accept help too." My mother nodded immediately. "Richard's only trying to make things easier." I finally agreed. It didn't feel like surrender. It felt like avoiding an argument. Within days, scholarship letters started arriving at Richard's office instead of directly to our house. He said it would prevent documents from getting lost. He created folders, color-coded labels, application checklists. Everything looked incredibly organized. Whenever I asked about a program, he always had an answer. "Still under review." They requested another transcript. "They're waiting on committee meetings." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Then Thanksgiving arrived. Most of the family gathered at Richard's house. After dinner, while everyone else watched football, I walked into the kitchen looking for more iced tea. I stopped just before entering. Richard was speaking quietly with my mother. "We can't pretend resources are unlimited," he said. "I know," my mother answered softly. "Ethan has the better chance to build something big." "What about Isabel?" Richard sighed. "She'll be fine. She's always been independent. She doesn't need nearly as much help." There was a long silence. Then he said something I have never forgotten. "Sometimes the strongest child carries the weight so the family can move forward." Neither of them knew I was standing just outside the doorway. I waited for my mother to disagree. to remind him that I had earned every opportunity I was chasing. Instead, she quietly asked, "Do you really think that's what's best?" Richard answered without hesitation. "I do." I stepped back before either of them saw me. For the rest of the evening, I smiled in family photos. I laughed at jokes. I helped wash dishes. But something inside me had shifted. Not enough to accuse anyone. Not enough to distrust my own family. Just enough to notice. A week later, Monica Reed called me into her office before first period. She looked puzzled. Not angry, not disappointed, just genuinely confused. She held a folder in one hand and asked the question that would unravel everything. "Isabel, why did you withdraw from your Harrison Leadership Scholarship interview?" I stared at her. "I'm sorry?" She frowned. "The committee notified us yesterday." I felt my stomach tighten. "What interview?" For a moment, I honestly thought Monica had confused me with another student. "There has to be a mistake," I said. She looked back down at the letter in her hand. "I checked twice before calling you in." My heartbeat began to speed up. "I never withdrew." "The committee's email says you declined the interview last Friday." I didn't. "They also thanked you for notifying them early enough to offer your interview slot to another applicant." I felt the room tilt ever so slightly. "What email?" Monica slowly turned her computer monitor toward me. "There." The message displayed on the screen was short, professional, polite. "Thank you for selecting me as a finalist. After discussing my future plans with my family, I have decided to withdraw from the Harrison Leadership Scholarship process. Please offer my interview opportunity to another deserving student." At the bottom was my full name, Isabel Patterson. I stared at it for several seconds. "I didn't write this." Monica studied my face instead of the email. "I believe you." Those 3 words nearly made me cry, because until that moment I wasn't sure anyone would. She clicked another tab. "The message came from the email address you listed on your application." I leaned closer. It was my address. Exactly right. No misspellings, no missing letters, no fake account pretending to be me. "I never sent it." "You've checked your sent folder." "I check my email every day." "Then check it again tonight." "I will." She closed the browser. "I'm not accusing you of lying." "I know. But if this wasn't you, we need to understand how it happened." "I don't understand either." She sighed. "The committee already filled the interview slot." "So, that's it? For this scholarship?" She paused carefully. "Yes." I thanked her for telling me. I don't remember walking through the hallway afterward. Only fragments remained in my memory. Students laughing between classes, a locker slamming shut, someone asking if I was okay. I answered automatically without hearing myself. By the time I reached home that afternoon, I had already convinced myself there had to be some simple explanation. Maybe I had accidentally clicked something. Maybe the email system had malfunctioned. Maybe I was remembering the dates incorrectly. I opened my laptop before taking off my backpack. Inbox, nothing. Sent folder, nothing. Deleted items, nothing. Drafts, nothing. I searched Harrison. Every message I'd exchanged with the scholarship office appeared exactly where it should. Except for the withdrawal email, it simply didn't exist. Not in any folder, not anywhere. I refreshed the page, then again. Still nothing. My mother arrived home around 6. I showed her everything. She listened quietly before saying, "Maybe you accidentally deleted it." "I don't delete important emails." "People make mistakes. I know I didn't send it." She hesitated. "Let's ask Richard." The suggestion caught me off guard. "Why him?" "He helped organize your scholarship paperwork." Maybe he knows something. It sounded reasonable. So we drove to my uncle's office after dinner. Richard was still there, sitting behind a large oak desk surrounded by framed community awards and photographs from charity events. He smiled as we walked in. "To what do I owe the surprise visit?" My mother explained what Monica had told us. Richard listened without interrupting. Then he leaned back in his chair. Just one word. No surprise, no concern, just, "I never withdrew," I said. "I'm sure you believe that." I blinked. "What does that mean?" He folded his hands together. "Senior year is stressful." "I know. Students forget things." "I didn't forget this." "You've been working." "Yes." "Volunteering." "Yes." "Applying everywhere." "Yes." He smiled patiently. "People under pressure sometimes make decisions they later regret." "I never made that decision." His smile remained unchanged. "I'm not saying you're lying." "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying memory isn't perfect." I looked at my mother. She wasn't defending me. She wasn't agreeing with him either. She simply looked uncertain. Richard opened a file drawer beside his desk. "I've kept copies of everything you've given me." He removed a neatly organized folder labeled with my name. Every scholarship application, every recommendation letter, every transcript, everything looked perfectly arranged. "If I had seen anything unusual," he said, "I would have told you." He flipped through page after page, then stopped. "I don't have a copy of the withdrawal email." "Exactly," I said, "because I never wrote it." "Or because it wasn't part of the paperwork you gave me." His tone remained calm, almost comforting. It was impossible to argue with someone who never raised his voice. He wasn't calling me dishonest. He wasn't accusing me. He was simply offering explanations that made me sound unreliable. By the time we left his office, I wasn't angry anymore. I was confused. That was somehow worse. Over the next several weeks, more college responses arrived. Some offered partial scholarships. Some offered admission without financial aid. The Harrison Scholarship remained the one opportunity that could have completely changed my future. I accepted enrollment at a smaller public university closer to home. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was still an education. I told myself to move forward. That's what responsible people did. One Friday afternoon, Monica stopped me outside the counseling office. "Can you stay a few minutes?" We sat together after the last bell. She closed the office door. "I've been thinking about your situation." "So have I." She reached into a cabinet and removed a thin folder. "I can't reopen the scholarship decision." "I know, but I can show you something." Inside were printed copies of routine communication between Roosevelt High School and several scholarship organizations. Nothing unusual at first. Then she pointed toward one document. "Look here." A confirmation log. It recorded when scholarship notifications had been sent. Beside the Harrison Scholarship was a handwritten note. "Student withdrew before interview. Family representative confirmed decision." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "I honestly don't know." "My family never contacted them." Monica looked directly at me. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She tapped the paper lightly. "Someone identified themselves as representing your family." "Who?" "There isn't a name." "Can they tell us?" "They won't release internal records." I stared at the page. A family representative. Those two words echoed in my mind. Richard. He had handled my paperwork. He received scholarship mail. He spoke with organizations all the time because of his nonprofit work. But I immediately rejected the thought. No, it couldn't be him. Whatever his flaws, he had always helped our family. Hadn't he? Monica carefully slid the paper back into the folder. "I've worked with students for 27 years. She paused. And I've learned something. What? When something important doesn't make sense? She reached into another drawer. From it, she took a large manila envelope. Inside were photocopies of every document I had submitted through her office. Recommendation letters, activity logs, application summaries, submission receipts. I make copies of everything before it leaves my office. I looked up in surprise. You kept all these? I keep them for every student until long after graduation. She pushed the envelope toward me. Take them. I don't want to cause trouble. I'm not asking you to. Then why? Her expression softened. Because memories fade. She paused. But paper usually doesn't. I accepted the envelope with both hands. It felt heavier than paper should have. Before I reached the door, Monica spoke one last time. Isabel. I turned. Whatever happened? She chose her next words carefully. Never throw away anything connected to this scholarship. I nodded, still believing I would probably never need those papers. I had no way of knowing that 15 years later, those forgotten copies would become the first pieces of evidence that someone had spent years hoping no one would ever compare. The following fall, I enrolled at Northeastern Illinois University. It wasn't the campus I had imagined walking across during my senior year of high school. There were no residence halls filled with students from across the country because I couldn't afford to live on campus anywhere. I commuted nearly an hour each way by train, carrying the same backpack I'd used in high school until the zipper finally broke during my junior year. I worked 25 to 30 hours a week at a neighborhood grocery store. Some semesters I stocked shelves before sunrise. Other semesters I worked the evening register until almost midnight. My schedule looked impossible on paper. Class, train, work, homework, sleep, repeat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was predictable. Predictability became my version of peace. Whenever I caught myself wondering what life might have looked like if I'd received the Harrison Leadership Scholarship, I forced myself to stop. There was no point living inside a version of my life that no longer existed. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. Richard made sure I never forgot the comparison. At every holiday gathering, someone eventually asked Ethan how college was going. His answers always sounded exciting. Leadership retreats, internships, networking dinners, study abroad opportunities. One Christmas, he described spending a week in Washington, D.C. meeting education policymakers. I smiled and told him it sounded incredible. It wasn't fake. I truly meant it. None of what happened had been Ethan's fault. As far as I knew then, he'd simply earned an opportunity. Richard, however, never let the conversation end there. He would casually turn toward me. And how's work at the grocery store, Isabel? It pays the bills. Still commuting? Yes. He nodded sympathetically. Life teaches resilience. Everyone at the table would become quiet. Then he'd add the sentence I grew to hate. You've always been the practical one. It sounded like a compliment. It never felt like one. Practical, responsible, independent. Those words became excuses people used whenever I needed support. If I solved my own problems, they assumed I no longer deserved help. My mother rarely challenged Richard anymore. Sometimes I caught her watching me with guilty eyes. Other times she seemed relieved that I wasn't asking the family for money. I couldn't tell which hurt more. After graduation, I accepted an entry-level administrative position at a community college. The salary wasn't impressive. The office furniture was older than I was. Half the computers took 10 minutes just to start. But I loved the work. Students walked into our office carrying fear disguised as paperwork. Some were first-generation college students. Some had children. Some worked night shifts. Some had no idea how financial aid even worked. I recognized the look in their eyes because I'd worn it myself. One afternoon, a freshman named Alicia sat across from my desk, nearly in tears. "They rejected my scholarship," she whispered. "Did they tell you why?" "They said my application was incomplete." "Did you submit everything?" "I think so." "Let's not guess." I opened her electronic file and compared every uploaded document with the submission checklist. Within 5 minutes, I found the problem. Her recommendation letter had been uploaded under the wrong category. The system had automatically marked it as missing. "It wasn't your fault," I said. "It was categorized incorrectly. So, I still have a chance. We'll call them today." She cried before we even picked up the phone. Not because everything was fixed, because someone had finally looked carefully instead of assuming she was careless. That conversation stayed with me. So did many others. Over the next several years, I noticed a pattern. Most scholarship problems weren't dramatic. They were administrative: a missing signature, an incorrect upload, a misunderstood deadline. But every so often there was something different. A parent insisting on handling every document, an uncle demanding access to a student's portal, a guardian answering questions the student should have answered. Whenever that happened, I gently asked to speak directly with the applicant. Sometimes nothing was wrong, sometimes everything was. One student quietly admitted she had never even seen the essays submitted under her name. Another discovered her father had declined financial aid because he didn't want her moving away from home. A third found out an older sibling had used her email account without permission. Those cases were rare, but they unsettled me. Each time I documented one, a strange feeling settled in the back of my mind. Something about them felt painfully familiar. I couldn't explain why. Then one afternoon, nearly 12 years after I graduated high school, I attended a statewide conference for university financial aid professionals. Most sessions were exactly what you'd expect: federal policy updates, compliance training, data security, nothing particularly exciting. During a break between presentations, I introduced myself to an older man standing alone near the coffee station. His name tag read Thomas Gallagher, retired director of undergraduate admissions. We chatted casually for several minutes. He asked where I worked. I asked how long he'd been retired. Then he noticed my conference badge. "Isabel Patterson." "That's me." He looked at me for an unusually long moment. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "I know I've seen that name before." I laughed. "Probably not." "No." He frowned thoughtfully. "I'm almost certain." "You applied somewhere my office handled." "I applied to a lot of places." He remained silent. Then his expression changed. Not recognition, confusion. "Harrison leadership." The words landed like a stone in my stomach. "I did apply." "You were one of the highest-rated applicants." I blinked. "I was... absolutely." My mouth went dry. "I never made it to the interview." "I know." His voice had become strangely cautious. "You withdrew." "That's what everyone told me." He continued studying my face. "Funny. What is... You don't look like someone who chose to walk away." I tried to smile. "Life happens." He didn't return the smile. Instead, he asked a question no one had asked me in over a decade. "Did you ever read your committee evaluations?" I almost laughed. "I never had evaluations." His eyebrows lifted. "You should have." "I wasn't selected. Finalists always received evaluation summaries after the cycle closed." "I never received anything." He became very quiet. Then he said almost to himself, "That's odd." We were interrupted by the announcement that the next seminar was beginning. Before walking away, Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a business card. "I don't have access to university records anymore." I understand, but archives have changed. What do you mean? A lot of historical scholarship files are being digitized now. I stared at the card. If something about your application never made sense... He paused. This might finally be the right time to ask questions. I slipped the card into my notebook. For the rest of the conference, I couldn't concentrate. His words echoed through every presentation. You were one of the highest-rated applicants. No one had ever told me that. Not Monica, not Richard, not the scholarship committee, not anyone. When I arrived home that evening, I pulled the old manila envelope Monica Reed had given me 15 years earlier from the back of my filing cabinet. It was worn around the edges. The tape had yellowed with age. Inside were copies of every application recommendation letter, transcript, and submission receipt. Everything was exactly where she'd left it. I spent hours comparing dates, signatures, and correspondence. Nothing immediately explained what had happened, but one thing became painfully clear. Monica hadn't kept those copies because she was organized. She'd kept them because even back then she believed something was wrong. I reached for Thomas Gallagher's business card again. After staring at it for nearly 5 minutes, I finally picked up my phone. The email I wrote contained only 3 sentences. Mr. Gallagher, you said my scholarship file might finally answer questions that have never left me. If there is any lawful way to review those archived records, I'd like to know where to begin. Thank you, Isabel Patterson. I pressed send. Less than 24 hours later, my inbox received a reply that would reopen a chapter of my life I had spent 15 years trying to bury. The message began with a single sentence that made my hands tremble. You need to speak with Dr. Eleanor Price before anyone else. I stared at Thomas Gallagher's email for nearly 10 minutes before replying. There wasn't much to say. I thanked him. I asked how to contact Dr. Eleanor Price, and I tried very hard not to sound like someone chasing ghosts from 15 years earlier. His answer arrived before lunch. He attached a phone number, a university email address, and one short explanation. Dr. Price now chairs the University Scholarship Integrity Committee. If anyone can legally review archived records, it's her. I had never heard of the Scholarship Integrity Committee. Later, I learned why. It hadn't existed when I was in high school. The committee had been established years later after several universities merged their scholarship oversight offices and began reviewing old administrative procedures. Most of its work involved correcting record-keeping errors, updating digital archives, and investigating rare cases where application processes might have been compromised. It wasn't a department that handed out money. It protected trust. That distinction mattered. I almost didn't call. Part of me still believed I was overreacting. Maybe Thomas had remembered someone else's file. Maybe I had been a strong applicant, but not strong enough. Maybe there had never been anything suspicious at all. I picked up the phone anyway. A calm voice answered. Office of Scholarship Integrity. This is Dr. Price. Hello. My name is Isabel Patterson. There was a brief pause. Mr. Gallagher mentioned you might contact me. That surprised me. He already called you. He emailed yesterday. I see. I've reviewed a small portion of your archived file. My pulse quickened. You have only enough to determine that your request deserves attention. I sat down without realizing I had been standing. What exactly does that mean? It means I would rather discuss this in person than speculate over the phone. She suggested the following Tuesday. I drove to the university with no expectations except answers. The Scholarship Integrity Office occupied a quiet corner of an administration building that looked newer than anything I remembered from my own college years. There were no long lines, no crowded waiting rooms, just shelves of archived files and offices with glass walls. Dr. Eleanor Price greeted me herself. She was probably in her early 60s, dressed simply with the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades solving complicated problems, one document at a time. She shook my hand firmly. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for seeing me." She led me into a conference room. A thick archival folder rested on the table. Across the front was a printed label: Patterson Isabel Harrison Leadership Scholarship. Seeing my own name typed on a folder that had been closed for 15 years felt strangely emotional. Dr. Price noticed my expression. "You've never seen this before." "No. You should have." She opened the file carefully. "I need to explain something before we begin." I nodded. "Archived scholarship files belong to the university?" "I understand. There are privacy laws governing what I can show you." "Of course. But because this file concerns your own application, you're entitled to review a significant portion of it." She placed several documents in front of me. The first pages were familiar: application forms, recommendation letters, my transcript, volunteer records. Everything looked exactly like the copies Monica had preserved. Then Dr. Price separated another stack. "These were not included in your copy." I looked down. Each page carried handwritten notes, committee comments, evaluation scores, individual rankings. One evaluator had written, "Exceptional academic discipline. Demonstrates unusual emotional maturity." Another wrote, "One of the strongest community service records this cycle." A third simply underlined my name and added, "Outstanding interview potential." I couldn't speak. For 15 years I had believed I wasn't good enough. These strangers had thought the opposite. "I never knew. I didn't expect you did." Dr. Price quietly slid another page toward me. It summarized the committee's preliminary rankings before interviews. There were 12 finalists. Beside my name was a handwritten number: 1. I stared at it until the ink blurred. She finished the sentence gently. "You were ranked first." I leaned back in my chair. For years, I'd replayed my senior year wondering which essay had failed, which interview question I would have answered poorly, which student deserved the scholarship more than I did. There had never been an interview. The race had ended before I even reached the starting line. I swallowed hard. If I was ranked first, I couldn't finish. Dr. Price answered anyway. "Then naturally your next question is why your candidacy ended." "Yes." She folded her hands. "That question is exactly why you're here." She reached into another folder. "This is where things become unusual." She showed me the administrative timeline: application received, academic review completed, recommendation letters verified, financial documents accepted, interview scheduled. Everything followed normal procedure. Until one entry: candidate withdrew prior to interview. Next to it was a digital notation: verification received. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Neither did we." She surprised me again. When your file was digitized, one of our archivists noticed inconsistencies." "What inconsistencies?" "The withdrawal documentation." She pointed to the section marked incomplete. "Several pages referenced in the administrative log are missing." "Missing." "They were listed in inventory years ago, but they are no longer inside the physical file." I looked up. Could someone have removed them? "We don't know." She was careful with every answer. "We don't assume misconduct simply because documents are absent." "So what happens now?" "We investigate." She pulled another document from the folder. "This is an archive recovery request." I frowned. "What's that?" "When older paper files were digitized, backup images were sometimes captured before folders were reorganized." "You mean?" "There may be electronic copies of pages that no longer exist in the physical file. Hope appeared so suddenly it almost frightened me.
So, the missing documents might still exist.
Possibly.
But it takes time.
I'll wait. She smiled faintly. I suspected you would. Over the next several weeks, Jason Miller joined the review. He wasn't an investigator in the criminal sense. He specialized in administrative compliance and legal documentation. His job was to determine whether archived university records accurately reflected what had happened years earlier. During our first meeting, he explained the process in plain language.
We're not trying to prove
anyone guilty.
Then what are you trying to prove?
Only one thing.
What? Whether the official record tells the complete story.
That answer immediately earned my trust. He wasn't chasing headlines. He was chasing accuracy. Every Friday, Dr. Price emailed a brief update. Sometimes they found nothing. Sometimes another scanned page surfaced. Sometimes a date was corrected. The progress felt painfully slow. Then one Thursday afternoon, Jason called. His voice sounded unusually controlled.
Miss Patterson. Yes. We recovered something.
I stopped walking.
What is it?
Several deleted evaluation notes. My heart pounded.
Were they important?
Very. I drove to campus the following morning. Jason had printed the recovered files. They included committee discussions that had never appeared in the paper archive. One evaluator wrote, "Candidate Patterson consistently received the highest composite score among finalists." Another note recommended offering me additional leadership funding beyond tuition.
I covered my mouth. I can't believe this.
Jason nodded.
Neither could we.
But he didn't finish. I recognized the hesitation immediately. What? There is still one administrative record we haven't recovered.
What kind of record?
He looked toward Dr. Price before answering.
The document that authorized your withdrawal.
Silence filled the room. If we find that, I began. Jason finished the thought. We may finally learn who actually submitted it. Then he placed another inventory report on the table. One line had been highlighted. Restricted administrative attachment sealed. I looked up. What does sealed mean? Dr. Price answered quietly. It means no one has legally opened it since it was archived. I had never expected a single word to make me nervous. Sealed. It sounded less like an administrative label and more like a promise that someone years earlier had intentionally decided a document should remain untouched until there was a legitimate reason to reopen it. Dr. Eleanor Price rested both hands on the conference table. I don't want you to misunderstand what this means. I don't think I do. A sealed attachment isn't proof that something improper happened. Then why seal it? In older scholarship cases, sensitive administrative materials were sometimes separated from the main file. Privacy concerns, legal correspondence, identity verification, internal recommendations.
So it could be nothing.
It could. She didn't offer false reassurance. But we won't know until we follow the proper process. Jason Miller slid a packet toward me. Because the attachment contains information connected to your application, the university needs your written authorization before we request judicial approval to unseal it. I glanced at the document. It wasn't complicated. It simply confirmed that I was requesting access to records concerning my own scholarship application. I signed without hesitation. Not because I expected dramatic revelations. Because after 15 years, I was tired of living with unanswered questions. The authorization process took almost 3 weeks. During that time, I returned to work and tried to focus on my students. It wasn't easy. Every time my phone vibrated, I wondered whether another piece of my past had finally surfaced. One afternoon, a student named Marcus came into my office carrying a folder so tightly his knuckles had turned white. I think I messed everything up. What happened? My aunt filled out my financial aid forms. And I trusted her. He looked embarrassed.
Now, nothing matches.
I spent nearly an hour helping him sort through conflicting addresses, tax forms, and electronic signatures. When we finished, he sighed with relief.
I should have handled it myself.
I smiled.
No.
He looked surprised.
You should have been allowed to understand it yourself.
He frowned slightly.
There's a difference.
A big one. As soon as he left, I sat quietly for several minutes. 15 years earlier, no one had taught me that difference.
I'd been praised for trusting my family.
No one had explained that trust should never require surrendering control over decisions that belonged to me. That realization hurt more than I expected. The call finally came on a rainy Tuesday morning.
This is Jason Miller. I've been waiting for your call. I know.
His voice remained measured.
The sealed attachment has been released.
I closed my office door. Did you open it?
This morning. And I think you should come in. I'll leave now.
When I arrived, the atmosphere felt different. Neither Jason nor Dr. Price greeted me with the quiet optimism I'd grown used to. Instead, both looked unusually serious. The sealed packet rested on the conference table inside a transparent archival sleeve. Jason spoke first.
We're going to walk through this one page at a time.
I nodded. I appreciate that. He carefully removed the first document. It was an internal memorandum dated 15 years earlier. Across the top were the words Identity Verification Review. I leaned forward.
What is that?
When scholarship finalists withdrew after interviews had already been scheduled, committee staff were instructed to verify the request. To make sure it actually came from the student.
Exactly.
The report summarized routine procedures. Telephone confirmation, email confirmation, administrative review. Nothing unusual. Then Jason placed another page beside it. This one was different. Typed across the center was a sentence highlighted years ago by someone inside the university. Student unavailable. Communication completed with individual identifying himself as family representative. I felt my stomach tighten. There it was again. Family representative. The exact phrase Monica Reed had shown me years before.
So someone really did contact them.
Jason nodded.
Yes. Do we know who? Not yet.
The next document answered part of that question. It wasn't a withdrawal letter. It was an internal email between committee employees. One staff member had written, "Applicant did not answer listed telephone number. Family representative confirmed withdrawal decision already discussed with student." Another replied, "Proceed unless contradictory communication received before interview schedule closes." I stared at the page. No one ever called me. Dr. Price looked genuinely troubled. I believe you. They never tried again.
Apparently not.
Jason added quietly, administrative procedures were different 15 years ago. I know, but someone spoke for me?
Yes. And they believed him. Yes.
Neither of us needed to say the obvious question aloud. Who? Jason reached for another document. This is the most significant item recovered today. It was the photocopy of a courier delivery receipt. Unlike everything else we'd seen, it contained handwritten signatures. One line identified the recipient inside the scholarship office. Another identified the person who delivered additional application materials. Jason pointed to the final entry. Read this line. I lowered my eyes. Supplemental authorization received. Below it appeared a signature. Not mine. Not even close. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Can you identify it? Jason asked. I slowly shook my head. No, we couldn't either. So we're back where we started. Not exactly.
He slid one final sheet toward me. Unlike the others, it wasn't 15 years old. It had been created only days earlier. A forensic document examiner had compared the unknown signature with archived signatures already stored in university records. The conclusion wasn't dramatic. It simply stated signature does not match applicant Isabel Patterson. I let out a long breath. So they finally know I didn't sign it? Yes. But that's only half the question. The other half is who did. Dr. Price excused herself briefly and returned carrying another archive box. I asked our records department to continue searching after Jason found the courier receipt. She opened the lid. One employee found something we'd overlooked. Inside was an old server backup log, not the actual email, just the technical record documenting its transmission. Jason explained it carefully. 15 years ago, the university stored limited routing information for incoming scholarship emails. So, we may not have the original message, but we know where it entered the system. He pointed to a column labeled Originating Network, then another labeled Registered Business Account. I looked at the printed address. It wasn't a personal internet connection. It wasn't my home. It wasn't my high school. It belonged to a commercial office. My heartbeat accelerated. Jason continued. We requested subscriber records. They still exist. For businesses sometimes. He turned another page. The subscriber information had finally been identified. Business name Patterson. Patterson Community Development Group. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. That was Richard's nonprofit organization, the office where scholarship letters had been delivered. The office where I'd sat across from him while he calmly suggested I had probably forgotten withdrawing. No, I whispered. There has to be another explanation. Dr. Price answered gently. There might be. Jason nodded in agreement. An office network doesn't identify one individual. Other people worked there. Correct. So we cannot conclude who sent the message. Logic, evidence, procedure. Everything I believed in required me to accept that. Richard owned the office, but ownership wasn't proof. Still, one memory suddenly returned with startling clarity. The afternoon my mother and I visited Richard after Monica told us about the missing interview. He hadn't seemed surprised, not even once. He hadn't asked to read the email. He hadn't questioned whether the scholarship office had made a mistake. Instead, he'd calmly explained that people under stress often forgot important decisions. At the time, I thought he was comforting me. Now, for the first time, I wondered if he had simply been protecting himself. Jason interrupted my thoughts. We're still waiting for one final response. From who? The courier company. What could they possibly have? If their archived delivery record survived, he looked directly at me. They may tell us exactly who walked into the scholarship office carrying that authorization packet. The courier company's response arrived 4 days later. Jason called just after 9 on a Monday morning. Can you come in today? His tone wasn't urgent. It was careful. I can leave now. Drive safely. That was all he said. No hints, no conclusions. By then I had learned to appreciate that about him. He never tried to fill gaps with assumptions. When I reached the Scholarship Integrity Office, both Jason and Dr. Eleanor Price were already waiting. A single envelope sat in the middle of the conference table. It looked ordinary. Brown paper, a printed shipping label. Nothing about it suggested it had quietly survived for 15 years. Jason opened it. The courier company no longer had the original delivery file. My heart sank. But, he smiled faintly, they had something better. He removed several scanned documents. When businesses changed digital storage providers years ago, many shipping manifests were preserved as backup images. He handed me the first page. delivery route, pickup location, delivery time, employee identification. Everything looked routine. Then my eyes stopped on one line. Package accepted from Patterson Community Development Group. No surprise there. I kept reading. The next line listed the individual who handed the package to the courier. Unlike the university records, this document included a printed name. Authorized contact Richard Patterson. I stared at it. Again. Then a third time. No one spoke. Finally, I looked up. So, he personally gave them the package. Jason nodded. According to the courier records, yes. But that still doesn't prove he knew what was inside. Correct. The answer frustrated me, but it does establish a documented chain of custody. I leaned back slowly. Every new piece of evidence seemed to answer one question while creating another. Dr. Price slid another document toward me. This was recovered from the courier archive as well. It was a shipment declaration. Most of it consisted of standard boxes and identification numbers. Near the bottom was a handwritten description. Supplemental scholarship authorization documents. I felt my throat tighten. So he knew scholarship paperwork was being delivered. Jason answered immediately. Whoever prepared this shipment certainly did. Again, careful wording, no assumptions, only facts. 2 days later, I asked my mother if we could have lunch together. She sounded happy. It's been too long. We met at a small diner we'd visited dozens of times while I was growing up. For the first 15 minutes, we talked about ordinary things, work, weather, her garden. Neither of us mentioned Richard. Eventually, I placed copies of the courier records on the table. She looked confused. What's this? I've been reviewing my old scholarship file. Her smile faded. I thought you let that go years ago. So did I. She adjusted her glasses and began reading. Halfway through the first page, her expression changed. What is this supposed to mean? It means Uncle Richard personally delivered scholarship documents to the committee. She looked up immediately. He was helping you. Maybe. He handled paperwork all the time. I know. She looked relieved by her own explanation. Then this doesn't prove anything. I didn't say it did. I watched her shoulders relax slightly. I only wanted to know whether you remembered giving him permission. She frowned. For what? To represent me. I assumed... She stopped talking. What? I don't know. You don't know what... I assumed you had. I remained silent. She slowly lowered the papers. I never actually asked. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then she whispered something that hurt more than I expected. I trusted him, not because he had earned unlimited trust. Because he was her older brother growing up, Richard had always been the one who handled family problems. Funeral arrangements, insurance paperwork, mortgage questions. Everyone simply deferred to him, including my mother. I should have paid closer attention, she said quietly. I'm not trying to blame you. I know. She folded the papers carefully. But I think I've been blaming myself for years without understanding why. For the first time since my investigation began, I saw genuine regret instead of uncertainty. 3 evenings later, I drove to Richard's house. Not because I wanted a confrontation, because I wanted to hear him explain. He answered the door wearing jeans and a polo shirt. His smile disappeared the moment he saw my expression. Everything all right? Can we talk? He stepped aside. Of course. His home office looked exactly as I remembered. Awards, photographs, community plaques, everything carefully arranged. I remained standing. I've been reviewing my scholarship records. I heard. The answer surprised me. You heard your mother mentioned it. I nodded slowly. I have a few questions. He gestured toward a chair. Ask." I stayed where I was. "The courier company confirmed you personally delivered supplemental scholarship documents." "Yes." "You don't deny that." "Why would I?" His calmness unsettled me. "You asked me to organize everything." "I know. You trusted me." "I did. I delivered paperwork exactly as families often do." That was true. Families did that. I took another breath. "Did you ever identify yourself as my family representative?" "Probably." "Probably." "I don't remember every phone call I made 15 years ago." "Fair. Annoyingly fair." "Did you speak with the Harrison Scholarship Office?" "I'm sure I spoke with several scholarship offices." "About me?" "I imagine so." "You imagine." He folded his arms. "Isabel." "What?" "You've spent 15 years building a successful career." "Yes." "What exactly are you hoping to find now?" "The truth." "And if the truth isn't satisfying?" I didn't answer. He continued. "You didn't receive one scholarship." "I lost an opportunity." "You built a wonderful life anyway." "I did." "So why reopen old wounds?" "Because they never healed." For the first time, his expression hardened. "You always were sentimental." "No." I looked directly at him. "I've become careful." Silence settled between us. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me for weeks. "Did you ever tell anyone I wanted to withdraw?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the window. His back remained turned toward me. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before. "I believed I was protecting this family." I felt every muscle in my body tense. "Protecting us from what?" "From making emotional decisions." I waited. "You and Ethan were competing for the same circles." "We weren't competing." "In life, everyone competes." "No." I shook my head. "There were hundreds of scholarships." "You don't understand." "Then explain." He turned around slowly. "Ethan needed people to believe in him." "So did I. Not in the same way." His answer came so quickly it sounded rehearsed. "You were always going to succeed." I stared at him. "What?" "You've always been disciplined, responsible, independent." He repeated the same words he'd used throughout my entire life. "You would have found another path. And Ethan, he needed momentum." I felt my chest tighten. "So you decided whose future mattered more." "I decided what was best for the family." "You decided for me." He didn't deny it, not once. "I never intended to ruin your life." "You let everyone believe I walked away." "I believed you'd recover." "And if I hadn't?" His eyes dropped toward the floor. For the first time in my life, Richard Patterson looked uncertain. Only for a moment. Then he quietly said, "I never imagined the university would preserve those records for 15 years. The room fell completely silent. He hadn't confessed to forging documents. He hadn't admitted sending the withdrawal email, but he had admitted something equally important. He knew decisions had been made in my name, and he had expected the evidence to disappear with time. When I reached the front door, he spoke one last time. "Isabel." I turned. "What do you want from me?" I thought about that question all the way there. Justice and apology. The years I couldn't get back. Instead, I answered honestly. "I wanted the truth." He looked at me without speaking. "The university is inviting me to next week's graduation ceremony," I continued. "They said they're recognizing someone before the graduates receive their awards." Richard frowned. "They didn't tell me why." "They didn't tell me either." I walked to my car believing our conversation was over. I didn't know that the university had already decided exactly what would happen on that stage. The invitation from the university was surprisingly simple. There was no explanation. No schedule beyond the ceremony itself, no mention of speeches, just a formal request asking me to attend as an honored guest of the Scholarship Integrity Committee. I almost declined, not because I was afraid, because I didn't want to become the center of attention. For 15 years, I had built a life around helping other students succeed. I was comfortable sitting in the audience applauding someone else's accomplishments. Standing on a stage while hundreds of strangers looked at me felt like the opposite of everything I enjoyed. Dr. Eleanor Price called the evening before the ceremony. "I wanted to thank you for agreeing to come." "I still don't know why I'm coming." "I know." "You've been careful not to tell me. Because tomorrow isn't about surprising you." "What is it about?" She paused. "It's about correcting the official record." "That's all. That's enough." Her answer stayed with me all night. The official record. Not revenge, not humiliation. Truth. The graduation ceremony filled the university arena with thousands of people. Families carried flowers. Children waved homemade signs. Graduates posed for photographs before finding their seats. The excitement was contagious. For a while, I almost forgot why I had been invited. An usher escorted me to seats reserved for university guests near the front. Jason Miller nodded politely when he saw me. Dr. Price smiled. Neither of them behaved as though anything extraordinary was about to happen. The ceremony began exactly as every graduation does. The national anthem, opening remarks, faculty introductions, student speakers. Everything felt normal. Then, during a short break before scholarship recognition, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Well?" I turned. Richard Patterson. He was wearing an expensive navy suit with a donor recognition pin on his lapel. Several local officials were greeting him. People shook his hand. They thanked him for years of supporting educational programs. He noticed me almost immediately. His smile was polite. Then he looked at the guest credential hanging around my neck. "You're working today," I answered honestly. "I was invited." "As staff?" I didn't respond. He chuckled. "I suppose somebody has to organize the graduates." A few people nearby smiled awkwardly. I hoped the conversation would end there. Instead, Richard raised his voice just enough for those around us to hear. "You always did carry everyone else's dreams." Another uncomfortable silence. Then he laughed. "I guess some things never change." Several parents glanced toward us. I kept my expression calm. "I hope you enjoy the ceremony." I turned away. That should have ended it. Instead, just as scholarship recipients began walking toward the stage, Richard called after me. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried farther than I expected, "the real graduate today is my niece." A few people laughed politely. Richard smiled broadly. "She's been our family's burden for years." The words echoed across the section. A mother sitting nearby stopped clapping. One of the graduating seniors turned around. Even the student speaker standing backstage looked confused. No one knew what to say. I felt heat rise into my face. Not because I believed him, because humiliation always arrives before explanation. Richard looked satisfied. He expected embarrassment. He expected silence. He expected me to lower my head the way I had when I was 17. Instead, I remained exactly where I was. I didn't answer him. I didn't defend myself. I simply waited. Because for the first time in my life, I knew something he didn't. At that exact moment, Dr. Eleanor Price stood from her seat. She walked calmly onto the stage. The applause faded. She spoke quietly into the microphone. "Before we continue recognizing today's scholarship recipients," the arena became still, "there is one matter of university record that must be addressed." Confused whispers spread through the audience. Even Richard looked puzzled.
Dr. Price nodded toward Jason Miller. He carried a large archival folder to the podium, the same one I had seen weeks earlier. Across the front, everyone could now read the printed label. Patterson, Isabel. Dr. Price rested one hand on the folder. Earlier this year, our Scholarship Integrity Committee completed an administrative review involving archival records from 15 years ago. No names, no accusations, just facts. Our responsibility is to preserve the accuracy of university history. She carefully opened the folder. In reviewing this file, we discovered that one former finalist for the Harrison Leadership Scholarship had never received an accurate public record of her application. I heard someone in the audience whisper, "Who?" Dr. Price answered without hesitation, "Ms. Isabel Patterson." Hundreds of faces turned toward me. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I stood, not proudly, simply because it seemed like the respectful thing to do. Dr. Price continued, 15 years ago, Ms. Patterson was evaluated by every member of the scholarship committee. Jason handed her several copies of restored archival documents. She read directly from them. Exceptional academic discipline, another page. Demonstrates uncommon integrity and maturity, another. Outstanding commitment to community service, another. Recommended without reservation. She looked up. Most importantly, her voice remained calm. Every evaluator independently ranked Ms. Patterson first among all finalists prior to interviews. The arena fell completely silent. I heard someone inhale sharply behind me. Another person whispered, "First." Dr. Price nodded once. "Yes." She wasn't praising me. She was reading the historical record exactly as it had existed 15 years earlier. No exaggeration, no embellishment, only documented fact. Jason then displayed enlarged copies of the committee score sheets on the projection screens inside the arena. My name appeared repeatedly. Rank 1 leadership score highest, academic score highest, community service rating highest, recommendation status strongly recommended. The graduates began applauding first. Then their families joined them. Within seconds, the entire arena was standing. I didn't know what to do. No applause could give me back the opportunities I'd lost. But hearing the truth, spoken aloud after 15 years, released something I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Not shame, a question. Maybe I wasn't good enough. That question disappeared forever. When the applause finally settled, Dr. Price spoke again. Our committee cannot change history. She looked toward me. But we can acknowledge it honestly. She smiled warmly. Beginning next academic year, the university will establish the Isabel Patterson Opportunity Scholarship. A murmur swept through the audience. It will support first-generation students whose educational journeys demonstrate perseverance, service, and integrity. I covered my mouth. No one had warned me. No one! Dr. Price continued. This scholarship is not being created because Ms. Patterson experienced hardship. She paused. It is being created because her response to hardship reflects exactly the values this university wishes to encourage. The audience applauded even louder than before. I looked toward Jason. He smiled for the first time all morning. Then my eyes moved across the front rows until they found Richard. The confidence that had defined him only minutes earlier was gone. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He simply looked stunned, as though he had walked into a ceremony expecting to protect his reputation, only to discover that history itself had finally begun speaking. Then Dr. Price reached back into the archival folder one final time. There is one remaining administrative document, she said quietly. It concerns how this error occurred. The applause faded instantly. Richard's face lost what little color remained. The arena became so quiet that I could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. No one shifted in their seats. No one whispered.
The applause that had filled the room only moments earlier disappeared completely as Dr. Eleanor Price lifted the final document from the archival folder. She didn't rush. She looked across the audience before speaking. "I want to be very clear about what this document is and what it is not." That sentence mattered. This is not a criminal finding. It is not a court judgment. It is not an accusation beyond the evidence. Our responsibility is to explain how the university reached its administrative conclusions. I appreciated that more than I can explain. For 15 years, assumptions had shaped my life. I didn't want assumptions to shape anyone else's. Dr. Price nodded toward Jason Miller. He stepped to the podium holding a second folder. Our review compared archived correspondence courier records, digital server logs notarized, administrative documents, and preserved copies provided by Ms. Isabel Patterson's former guidance counselor. On the large screen behind them appeared a timeline. Not dramatic graphics, just dates, documents, verification records, every piece connected to the next. Jason spoke calmly. First, a highlighted document appeared. The committee confirmed that Ms. Patterson never submitted a withdrawal request through her verified student records. Another page appeared. Second, the signature contained within the supplemental authorization materials did not belong to Ms. Patterson. Another. Third, the withdrawal communication entered the university through the registered business network of Patterson Community Development Group. Another. Fourth, archived courier records confirm that supplemental scholarship materials were physically delivered from that organization by its authorized contact. Richard Patterson's name appeared on the screen exactly as it had on the shipping manifest. No commentary, no dramatic music, just a scanned document. Jason looked toward the audience. Our investigation found no evidence that Ms. Patterson voluntarily withdrew from scholarship consideration. I closed my eyes for a moment. That single sentence meant more to me than any award ever could. For 15 years, I'd quietly carried the belief that maybe I'd made some terrible mistake. Maybe I'd forgotten something. Maybe everyone else had been right. Now the university was officially saying otherwise. Dr. Price continued. The committee also determined that unauthorized communications were accepted as legitimate because institutional verification procedures at that time were insufficient. She didn't shift responsibility entirely onto one person. The university acknowledged its own failure, too. That honesty gave the entire moment credibility. She continued reading. As a result of these findings, the university has adopted additional verification safeguards to ensure no applicant may be withdrawn through third-party communication without direct confirmation. The graduates applauded. Not for me. For the change. For the students who would never experience what I had. Then Dr. Price reached the final page. Regarding Mr. Richard Patterson. The arena fell silent again. She read carefully. Our committee determined that Mr. Patterson personally delivered scholarship materials associated with Ms. Patterson's application and represented family interests during portions of the administrative process. Richard remained perfectly still. While applicable legal limitations prevent further legal proceedings regarding events occurring 15 years ago, she paused. The university has concluded that Mr. Patterson's conduct is inconsistent with the ethical standards expected of individuals recognized as educational partners. No one moved. Effective immediately. Another pause. Mr. Patterson's honorary advisory recognition is revoked. His name will be removed from university donor recognition displays related to student scholarship initiatives. And he will no longer represent this institution in any educational advisory capacity. There's no cheering, no celebration, only quiet understanding, consequences, nothing more, nothing less. Richard slowly lowered his head.
For the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid of him. I didn't feel victorious either. I simply felt finished. The ceremony concluded about 30 minutes later. Graduates celebrated with their families. Photographers gathered around students. Flowers changed hands. Life continued exactly as it should have. I was preparing to leave when someone called my name. Isabel. I turned. Ethan. We hadn't spoken privately in years. He looked exhausted. I don't know where to start. You don't have to rush. He stood silently for several seconds before speaking. I didn't know. I believed him immediately. Not because we shared blood, because of the look on his face. People pretending to be surprised usually explain too much. Ethan barely managed a sentence. My dad always told me you changed your mind. I know. I believed him. I know. His eyes filled with tears. I never asked questions because, honestly, he looked away. The scholarship changed my life. I know. I should have wondered why you never talked about it. You were 17. That's not an excuse. No, it isn't. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry anyway. There wasn't anything dramatic left to say. I accepted his apology because it belonged to him. Forgiveness, however, would take longer. Those two things aren't the same. Later that afternoon, my mother found me sitting alone outside the administration building. She carried 2 cups of coffee, just like she used to after my high school debate competitions. She handed one to me. I wasn't sure if you'd still want cream. I smiled faintly. You remembered. I remember more than you think. We sat together for several minutes. Finally, she spoke. I owe you something. You don't owe me coffee. She shook her head. No. She looked straight ahead. I owe you the truth. I waited. When Richard told me you were practical, she paused. I let myself believe practical children don't need protecting. The words broke something inside me. Not because they were cruel, because they were honest. I thought independence meant you'd be okay. She wiped her eyes. I confused strength with needing less love. I reached over and took her hand. You weren't the one who sent those documents? No, but I was the one who stopped asking questions. Neither of us cried dramatically. We simply sat there holding warm paper coffee cups while 15 years of silence finally began to loosen. Then she surprised me. I'm seeing a therapist. I looked at her. For a few months now. You are... I needed to understand why I trusted my brother more than my own daughter. That answer meant more than another apology. She wasn't asking me to erase the past. She was trying to understand it. Over the next week, several relatives called. Some wanted explanations. Others wanted gossip. A few insisted families should stay together. One cousin said Richard has suffered enough. An aunt told me people make mistakes. I answered every conversation almost the same way. I wish him peace. Then, I'm not reopening access to my life. Most people expected anger. Instead, I gave them a boundary. Eventually, the calls slowed. Not because everyone agreed, because boundaries leave very little to argue with. 3 weeks after the ceremony, an envelope arrived at my office. The return address read University Scholarship Integrity Committee. Inside was a single letter. Not about awards, not about publicity. At the bottom, Dr. Price had written by hand, "We hope this record allows your future to stand on truth instead of unanswered questions." Tucked behind the letter was one final document. Its title was simple: Official Restoration of Scholarship Record. For the first time in 15 years, my educational history reflected what had actually happened, not what someone else had decided the world should believe. 3 months after the graduation ceremony, I walked back into the same university auditorium. This time there were no caps and gowns, no television cameras, no standing ovation. Rows of folding tables filled the room, instead each covered with scholarship applications waiting to be reviewed. I wasn't there as a guest. I was there as a member of the Scholarship Integrity Advisory Council. The invitation had arrived a month after my record was officially restored. Dr. Eleanor Price called me personally. "We'd like you to help us improve the process." I laughed softly. "You've already improved it. We've improved the rules." She paused. "We need someone who understands why the rules matter." I accepted before she finished the sentence. Not because I wanted recognition, because I never wanted another 17-year-old to sit in a guidance counselor's office wondering why an opportunity had disappeared without explanation. That became my mission. Every scholarship application represented a real person, a family, a future, a dream that deserved to be handled with care. The committee had already implemented several new safeguards. Students now had to personally confirm any withdrawal through multiple forms of verification. Third-party representatives could assist with paperwork, but they could never cancel interviews or decline scholarships on a student's behalf without direct confirmation from the applicant. Administrative changes were documented more carefully. Archived records were preserved under stricter standards. To most people, they sounded like small procedural updates. To me, they sounded like thousands of futures quietly protected. The first recipient of the Isabel Patterson Opportunity Scholarship was a young woman named Maya Henderson. She was the first person in her family to attend college. Her father worked nights as a bus mechanic. Her mother cleaned offices downtown before sunrise. When Maya came to my office after receiving the scholarship, she looked almost exactly as I had looked at 17. Hopeful, nervous, afraid to believe something wonderful had actually happened. She held the award letter with both hands. "I still think someone made a mistake." I smiled. "I've heard those words before." She laughed. "Really, more than once." She hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did they name the scholarship after you?" For a moment, I considered telling her everything: the missing interview, the forged paperwork, the years of doubt. Instead, I answered with the truth she needed. Because people decided every student deserves a fair chance. She smiled. "I'll remember that." "I hope you remember something else too." "What?" "If anyone ever asks you to sign something you don't understand," she nodded before I finished, "ask questions. Always." She folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into her folder. Watching her leave my office felt strangely healing, not because she reminded me of who I had been, because she represented someone I would never have to become again. My relationship with my mother changed slowly. Neither of us pretended the past had disappeared. Healing wasn't forgetting. It was choosing honesty over silence. Every Sunday afternoon, she came to my apartment for coffee. Sometimes we talked about ordinary things: her tomato plants, my students, new recipes. Other times, we'd sit quietly for several minutes before one of us asked another difficult question. Those conversations weren't comfortable. They were necessary. One afternoon, she placed an old family photo album on my kitchen table. "I almost threw this away." I opened it. Inside were photographs from my high school years, volunteer projects, honor society ceremonies, science fairs. There were dozens of pictures I had forgotten existed. On the last page, tucked behind a plastic sleeve, I found something unexpected. A newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local student named Harrison Scholarship finalist." It was me. I had never seen the article. My mother smiled sadly. "Richard told me it would only make you feel worse after everything happened." She looked down. "So I put it away." I removed the clipping carefully.
I'm taking this home." "I hoped you would." It wasn't evidence anymore. The university had already restored the truth. Now it was simply part of my own history, a reminder that my story had never begun with failure, only interruption. Ethan called occasionally, never to erase the past, never to defend his father. Instead, he asked practical questions. How could he mentor younger students? Where could he volunteer? How could he support the new scholarship program without drawing attention to himself? I respected that. Accountability isn't measured by apologies, it's measured by different choices. Over time, we rebuilt something that resembled trust, not because we ignored what had happened, because neither of us expected the other to pretend it hadn't. Richard never contacted me again. I heard through relatives that he quietly resigned from several nonprofit boards over the following year. Some people believed he had been treated unfairly. Others believed he deserved worse. I stopped participating in those conversations. Justice had already done its work. I no longer needed public opinion to validate it. One evening, months after everything had settled, I visited Roosevelt High School. Monica Reed had officially retired. The school organized a small reception in the library. Former students stopped by throughout the evening. Teachers shared stories. Old photographs covered the walls. Near the end of the event, Monica handed me a familiar manila envelope. I laughed immediately. "You kept another copy," she smiled. "I always did make duplicates." Inside was the original checklist she had used while helping me complete my scholarship applications. Every document had a handwritten checkmark beside it. At the bottom, she'd written a note I had never noticed before. "Never underestimate this young woman. She belongs wherever she chooses to go." I looked at her. "When did you write this?" "The day you submitted your final application." "You never showed me." "I didn't think you needed it then." She gently squeezed my hand. "But I thought you might need it someday." I hugged her longer than either of us expected. When I drove home that night, I realized something I had never fully understood before. The greatest loss in my life had never been a scholarship. It had been 15 years spent wondering whether I had somehow failed myself. The university couldn't return those years, neither could Richard. Neither could anyone else. But the truth gave me something just as valuable. It gave those years an honest ending. Today, students sometimes ask why I care so much about documentation deadlines, verification, and transparency. I tell them that fairness isn't protected by good intentions alone. It's protected by careful people willing to ask questions, preserve records, and refuse to accept easy explanations when something doesn't feel right. I've also learned that boundaries are not acts of revenge. They are acts of self-respect. You can forgive someone for the peace it brings your own heart, while still deciding they no longer have access to your trust. Those two choices can exist together. Looking back now, I no longer remember my uncle's words as the loudest moment of that graduation ceremony. I remember something else. A quiet woman standing behind a podium, an old archival folder, and a simple sentence that finally gave a 17-year-old girl back the truth she had been denied. Before we celebrate today's graduates, we owe one former student the truth. That truth didn't erase my past. It finally allowed me to stop carrying it. For years, I believed healing meant getting back what had been taken from me. I eventually learned that real healing often looks different. Sometimes it begins when the truth is finally acknowledged, even if time cannot be reversed. If you've ever been overlooked, manipulated, or made to feel guilty for pursuing your own future, I hope this story reminds you that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of self-respect. Family relationships can be deeply meaningful, but they should never require you to surrender your voice, your opportunities, or your identity. Forgiveness, when it comes, is a personal choice.
Reconciliation, however, requires accountability and trust rebuilt through consistent actions, not simply shared history or family ties. It is possible to wish someone well while choosing not to give them access to your life again. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Your perspective may encourage someone else who is quietly carrying a similar burden. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories about family justice, resilience, and healing, I hope you'll consider subscribing so we can continue these conversations together. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.